without further ado, we have a real American Southern Confederate hero here tonight. He's a Vietnam veteran. He has made a career in the intelligence field. Former VP of the American Foundation for Accountability of Prisoners of War and Missing in Action from 1987 through 90. Former field leader of the Minuteman Project in Arizona, 2005. Teacher of the founding year of America, our second war for independence, and in multiple states for over 20 years. Founder of the Bill of Rights, Arkansas, 2017. He's had multiple radio programs and several different venues for several years. Currently, he has 2 radio programs on Republic Broadcasting Network. Saturday from 4 to 7 Eastern Time, Rebel Madman Radio. Sunday, 9 to 11 Eastern Time, and for most of us, 5 o'clock time. Ed and I found that out the first program that we were supposed to be on, Mike's program, we were going to be on from 5 to 6, and when we called into the program, it was ending. So that was not good. We had a lot better luck this past Sunday night. RepublicBroadcasting.org. And before you get out here tonight, if you got any questions, it's very easy to get on. I know Ronnie and Heather got on and listened to the program without any issues, and Dana and probably hopefully some others. But he's host of the SCC third Sunday night every month. And the center is going to be one of the sponsors for the program and for all of his program, not just the third Sunday night, but SCC third Sunday at 5 o'clock. You get some information how to get on there before you get out. Mike will be glad to share that with you. And Ed and I are on there as part of the program. And if anybody else wants to join us, it's a lot of fun. We'll come here to the building at 4:30 on that third Sunday, and Mike will put you on the air, and we'll talk about the Jamboree Ray or anything that anybody would like to talk about to come to it. But without further ado, the man that we're here to hear and see, Michael Gaddy.
Thank you, folks. Kind of surprised. Some of you folks were here last month and you heard me and you showed up again. What's up with that? But anyway, just wanted to be sure and to thank you all for showing up tonight. I really appreciate it. The title of my presentation is Secession is Freedom. But my wife warned me about something, and she said, you need to tell people this before you start yapping. So, and she's known me now for a while, so I guess she's right. But my grandfather, who lived to be 100 years old, they adopted me when I was about 7 or 8. My dad was killed in Korea. My mom turned to alcohol. My grandfather and my grandmother adopted me, and I am so grateful for that. I thank God for that every day. But my grandfather was about as tough a Confederate as you're ever going to meet in your entire life. His father was a captain of the 37th North Carolina Infantry Regiment. His uncle was a member of the 26th North Carolina that fought at Gettysburg and several other places too as well. But they suffered the greatest losses of any Confederate unit during that time frame. No one lost as many men as did the 26th North Carolina. I had 3 different relatives in that unit. But my grandfather told me something, and as my wife said, you need to get this out in the open. My grandfather told me at an early age, he said, boy, you can't be a Democrat and be a Confederate, and you can't be a Republican and be a Confederate. Because that means you would have to sacrifice something along the way in order to conform to that political party. And he said what we have always ended up sacrificing is our Southern dignity, our Southern heritage, and our Southernness. And I agree with him. So if I say something nasty about a Democrat, I'm not a Republican. So if I say something nasty about a Republican, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an equal opportunity criticizer. But one of the things I learned in the oxymoronic field called government intelligence was this, and they have been working for over 100 years to do something with the minds of the people of this country, and it's called cognitive dissonance. That is their key, because cognitive dissonance is holding two totally opposite thoughts to be the same thing. Now, if you don't think we have that, look around at how our Southern history is treated. And you know, how many people know that the Republican Party was founded in 1894 in Ripon, Wisconsin, and 19 of the delegates who were there who voted to start the party were members of the Communist Party. So the Communist Party started the Republican Party. There are people who will tell you it's changed. I don't think so. It's socialism. And I'm like Professor Clyde Wilson when he said, the Democrats are the evil party and Republicans are the stupid party. And I don't think I could agree with him anymore. But the one thing I can promise you, I have to get this off my chest, the one thing I can promise you is I will never vote for any man or woman who ever said they wanted to return this country to the legacy of Abraham Lincoln. I will not support anyone who would say that. And it's like I said to a friend of mine. I showed him a picture of Donald Trump at the Wailing Wall with his little mini beanie on and his hand up on the wall. I said, when he puts on a Confederate kepi and goes to the grave of Nathan Bedford Forrest, Robert E. Lee, or Stonewall Jackson and says, I support the South, I'll vote for him. But the thing about it is, and I don't think most people realize this, and I had people at the National Security Agency tell me that it doesn't make any difference who they vote for. We still run the show. So you can pick whatever puppet you want and dangle them on a string. It makes no difference. They're all controlled. If they weren't controlled, they wouldn't win. It's real simple. But secession, let's get to that subject. Secession. What does it mean to secede? It means to leave. Now, Patrick Henry wrote the very first Virginia Constitution, 1775, just a few weeks before the Declaration of Independence. Read that Constitution that Patrick Henry wrote, because you will see where Thomas Jefferson got his wording for the Declaration of Independence. 1784, they're talking about a new constitutional convention. The war is over. They don't like the Articles of Confederation. What did you have in the Articles of Confederation that you don't have in the Constitution? In the Articles of Confederation, the states control the central government. Under the Constitution, the central government controls the states. That was what they flipped on its ear. That's how they changed. Under the Articles of Confederation, Article 13, it didn't make any difference what law Congress passed. One state could say no, and it wasn't a law. How would you like to have that today? Under the Articles of Confederation, they had rotation, or what we call term limits. You could only serve in the government for 3 years out of any 6. Wouldn't you like to have that today? The Articles of Confederation had immediate recall. Imagine you elect someone, they promise you they're going to do this, they get to Washington, they do exactly the opposite. If we had the Articles of Confederation, you call them on the phone and say, get your butt on back here. You done lied to us. Wouldn't you like to have that? The Federalist monarchists had to get rid of that form of government because they couldn't control it. They could not run that government because they came up with taxing schemes under the Articles of Confederation on 5 different occasions. Because under the Articles of Confederation, there were no taxes on an individual. The states paid their taxes in proportion to their population and their land area. Is that not fair? Would that not be the fair way to collect taxes? There could be no individual tax on the people under the Articles of Confederation. What's the very first power the Constitution gives to Congress? Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. The power of unlimited taxation from unlimited sources for any reason they deem necessary and proper. Under the Constitution, we became fiscal slaves. The government owns your money and as much of it as they want, and you have no say-so on how they spend it. Now you're beginning to see where secession started playing in the minds. Well, the other thing I was going to tell you, which always startled me when I first found this letter, 1784, December 1784, Thomas Jefferson writes a letter to James Madison. And he says, as long as Patrick Henry's around, we're going to be stuck with one of these dumb constitutions after another. Now, folks, read the First Virginia Constitution. Tell me something in there that's dumb. Thomas Jefferson says, we must pray devoutly for the death of Patrick Henry. I'll send you the letter if you want a copy. It's there, National Archives. We must pray devoutly for the death of Patrick Henry. Why? Because Patrick Henry had stipulated that if he did amendments to the Virginia Constitution, he was going to establish a constitution based on the Christian faith. Patrick Henry, in the letters between the people we call founders, Patrick Henry is constantly mentioned as the most devout Christian among them. I think I mentioned it when I was here before. What's the first item on his will? I leave to my family and my posterity the Christian faith. Because without that, anything else I left for them would be worthless. And he was preaching to his doctor on his deathbed and actually got him to commit to Jesus Christ on his deathbed. And no one opposed the Constitution more than Patrick Henry. He spoke for days at the Virginia Ratification Convention. Funnily, what he predicted. He said, if they ratify the Constitution, the southern states are committing suicide. He also said, the North will constantly use the South as their milk cow. And he said, and we will be involved in a bloody civil war before 100 years has passed. So why don't we know about Patrick Henry? You know, I've talked to people in my community and I've asked them, oh, you ever heard of Patrick Henry? Oh, yeah. What do you know? Give me liberty or give me death. You know anything else? No. What else is there? Thank you, American public fool system. What's the 10th plank of the Communist Manifesto? Government-sponsored schools paid for with taxes. Do you get to pick the teachers? Do you even know what they learned in college? Probably not. I'm sure they were never taught anything about the South. So, but anyway, secession. 3 states put the right to secede in their ratification agreements with the federal government. Maybe Mr. Darby could tell us, if the government accepted that, does that not constitute a legal contract? Those 3 states, you're probably not going to believe who they are. Rhode Island, New York, Virginia. They put into their ratification agreements their right to secede at any time the government violated their oath to the people, violated their obligation to the people. They could secede. Did you know that there's a federal law that says now that if you advocate the overthrow of the U.S. government, you're a felon and you can get 20 years in prison? So you can't stand up for the Articles of Confederation legally. It's absolutely incredible. But also, and I spoke with Mr. Darby about the fact that the Articles of Confederation had a name, and that was the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Perpetual means what? Okay, well then how were these Federalists able to write a new Constitution in secret, swearing each other to never reveal what was happened at the convention for 50 years? Now, if we were all having a meeting to help each other, why would we make it secret? Would we care who came to listen to what we were doing? And here's something else, and I learned this years ago, but it was startling to me because I was never taught this in high school or college. So many of the things about this Constitution just don't make sense, and we have this love affair with the Constitution. And that came from the public fool system. Have any of you ever heard of an anti-federalist by the name of Samuel Bryan? He wrote as the Anti-Federalist Sentinel. And in his 3rd letter, he said something very pronounced. The Federalist will take this document and wrap it in the cloaks of divinity to get the people to swallow it down. You folks think there were Christians at the Constitutional Convention? If you know of one, name it. I'd love to hear it. Thomas Jefferson was a deist. The rest of them were Unitarians or deists. So where was the Christian? He wouldn't go. He smelled a rat. I think we all need to stop and think about these things because it is kept from us. History is kept from us intentionally. And you know, I got real angry a few years ago. I did a couple of podcasts on it about the renaming of military installations. And it's Fort Benning. They can have Fort Moore, and I can tell you where they can put it, but I'm going to be nice. They've changed the names of the other forts, and I just found out and this really bothered me 2 days ago. How many of you have ever heard of Clingman's Dome? The mountain in North Carolina next to Mount Mitchell, second highest mountain east of the Mississippi River. They changed the name. They found out Clingman was in the Confederate Army. Now, you know why that really angers me? Because my grandfather was named for that mountain. His name was Clingman Marcus Gaddy. And he was named because Clingman was a Confederate soldier. It's, as we look at the secession, and there's so many things, I wish I could be here for 2 days, because there's so much about this with so many little intricate details. But when we look at how many people know where the Revolutionary War was won? Everybody's going to say, well, they won Yorktown. Yorktown is where? Virginia. Well, here's the thing they don't teach you in school. The Revolutionary War was won in the South, because the South had these crazy redneck hillbillies that didn't believe in marching in a straight line and shooting at each other. They hid behind rocks and trees. Thomas Sumter, William Moultrie, John Sevier. We go back and look at these men and look at what they did. They just royally kicked the British butt at Kings Mountain. And here's the thing that's really going to get to you. The South financed their own war. They got nothing from the central government. They paid for everything because they paid their state militias. And their state militias won the Revolutionary War. But then guess what the federal government did to them after that? They submitted their vouchers to the federal government, the states did, to be paid, just like the northern states were paid. And guess what? They kept saying, oh, your vouchers are out of date, this voucher doesn't do this voucher doesn't do that. The South got nothing. But then what did the South do after that? Well, they come up with this great plan in Congress. Well, what we're going to do is the federal government is going to assume the war debt, and we're going to tax all the states to pay for it. So the southern states who didn't get paid had to pay taxes to pay for the others. Government hadn't changed, folks. It's still the same thing. The South was cheated from the very beginning. Patrick Henry knew this. He was very much against the federal government assuming the debts of the states. He said, if we're going to do it, if you're not going to pay the South, then just declare it all paid and let it go. But don't start taxing people to pay what you refused to pay the South. So we've gotten it the entire history. And now Patrick Henry did in his writing say milch cow. M-I-L-C-H, but back then that was milk cow. That was the same thing. But when we look at this secession, and the other thing I talked with Mr. Darby about was the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Well, I've got a document from the Pennsylvania legislature dated October of 1787, and the Pennsylvania legislature says our delegates, and it names them all, and guess what? Benjamin Franklin's not on the list. Franklin showed up on his own. No one elected him to be there. But the Pennsylvania legislature said when the convention was over, all of these delegates operated above any authority that was granted to them by the states. Therefore, they operated on their own. So they didn't represent the people of Pennsylvania, did they? Two other delegates left. Robert Yates and John Lansing Jr. from New York. Both would end up being Chief Justice of the New York Supreme Court. Both of them opposed the Constitution. And when they left on July the 10th, they wrote a letter to Governor Clinton, no relation to the crazy guy from Arkansas, wrote a letter stipulating for us to have stayed here, we would have had to violate the rights of the people who sent us here. And we can't do that. Two Yankees with integrity, both at the same time, that's got to be a new record. But seriously, they both, and Robert Yates wrote against ratification of the Constitution, and he wrote as the Anti-Federalist Brutus, B-R-U-T-U-S. Some great stuff there. And Samuel Bryan wrote 24 essays. And, you know, I'm not going to say I had a part in this, but about 8 months ago, you could buy those 24 essays at Amazon for $900. Well, I had every one of his essays. I've got 75 essays from Samuel Bryan that people don't even know exist because they hid them. But my wife and I sat down and we typed out every one of those. And we got on the internet and said, we will send these to people for a donation. You need to read these. You need to see them. I've still got them. Anybody who wants them here, let me know. Those 24 essays will tell you so much. And the reason Samuel Bryan was a resident of Philadelphia, not only that, but his dad, George Bryan, was the chief judge of the state of Pennsylvania at that time. Samuel Bryan knew what was going on, and he wrote about it very eloquently. Well, let me ask you a question touching on something else, staying with secession in a way. But how many of you went to school like me and thought that the Bill of Rights was part of the Constitution? Did you know that the delegates to the Constitutional Convention voted down a Bill of Rights unanimously? The Bill of Rights didn't come along for 2 years, and the only reason the Bill of Rights came along was a guy named Patrick Henry. Because he was telling people, we need to have another convention. We can't live with this Constitution. We need to have rights. So each state submitted proposals for amendments. The state of Virginia sent 40. 20 to protect the rights of the people, 20 to limit government. How many of them are in the Bill of Rights? 0. They were all turned down. Patrick Henry wrote those. Imagine that. So, the ratification, the way that it took place, if they would have gone by their own Constitution, there were over 200 suggestions for a Bill of Rights submitted to the first Congress. Over 200. James Madison, little Jimmy Madison, was chairman of the group. He put 7 Yankee lawyers into his group. They took all of those proposed amendments and threw them all out except for 14. Where did they get the authority to throw out the amendments that the people had proposed? The Fifth Amendment to the Constitution tells us how they're supposed to be ratified. They didn't do that. Of course, they didn't have the Bill of Rights then. And ironically, at the Constitutional Convention, late August, Elbridge Gerry of Massachusetts made a motion to add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. It was seconded by George Mason. James Madison tells him, and Alexander Hamilton and others said, no, we don't have time for that. No, the people have so many rights anyway, we don't need to put them on paper. We don't even need to do that. No, we're fine. Besides, it would take too long. We've been here for 3 months already. It'll take too long. George Mason goes, wait a minute. I've got 9 state constitutions with their Bill of Rights right in front of me. I can write a Bill of Rights in 3 hours or less. The motion failed, and it was voted down unanimously. Now, what can we think about a group of people that doesn't care what our rights are? But then they had this thing called the Committee of Style and Arrangement. How many of you can quote the preamble to the Constitution? We all were taught that, right, when we were in school? We, the people of the United States, in order to form more perfect union, establish justice, blah, blah, blah. But did you know that in that preamble there are 2 things? That preamble was rewritten by the Committee of Style and Arrangement. The Committee of the Whole had written that preamble to say, we the people of the states of, and listed each state. Well, Gouverneur Morris, who was the guy who wrote most of for the Committee of Style and Arrangement, did away with that and put we the people in there. What was the first question they got asked at the Virginia ratification by Patrick Henry? Who gave you the authority to say we the people? Instead of we the states. And as we all know, those good old folks back then called their state their country. Stonewall Jackson referred to Virginia as his country. When Robert E. Lee turned down the command of the Union Army, he told Montgomery, I cannot. My country's right there. I can't do that. That's why, because he turned down the command of the Union Army, that's why the Union Army, with all of their meanness, started burying their dead on his plantation. That's why we have Arlington, Virginia today. That was Robert E. Lee's plantation. So they buried their dead there to get even with him. People are ruthless. But when we get to secession was constitutional. Of course, King Abe I said no, it wasn't. And what did he use for a precedent for raising an army to invade the South? Most people are unaware of this. Anybody ever heard of the Whiskey Rebellion? Okay, the Whiskey Rebellion came about because Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, a Jew, decided he wanted a national bank, and he puts together a national bank, and he does all of these other things that he wants to do. But Hamilton is a weird character. I could probably get into a lot of stuff about Hamilton that would probably take me a lot longer than I have. But Hamilton was Jewish. His mother is buried in a Jewish cemetery, and I'm trying to think, Nevins. Oh, sorry, first day of my new brain. Sometimes it doesn't work good. But his mother is buried in a Jewish cemetery. Allegedly, he was the bastard son of a Scottish trader named Hamilton. That's false. He wasn't. That's just another thing they teach down at the indoctrination centers we call schools. And just to ask you a very simple question. Do you think your children and your grandchildren are ever going to be taught the truth in a school today? Are they ever going to be taught the truth about your ancestors, my ancestors, about the sacrifices they made? Therefore, I think it's imperative. You're talking about starting a charter school. I'm busting my backside on a homeschool curriculum in history, all the way through high school. Now, a nice lady at the United Daughters of the Confederacy up in Winchester, Virginia, asked me to do that after I gave a program up there at the Turner Ashby SCV group. And she said, our children need to know this. They're never going to know the truth of their heritage. And guys, that's the reason I thank God. If it hadn't have been for my grandfather, I'm not sure I would have known any of this. But he was adamant. Boy, you can't be just a little bit Confederate now. You either is or you ain't. Now, which one is it? Yes.
Northern history books will teach our kids with Northern teachers, and that's exactly what's happening.
Well, starting in 1948, there was a huge revolution thank you, ma'am, huge revolution in Europe. And there was a bunch of Marxists over there, Karl Marx included, and he was spreading communism all over Europe. Europe said, we're not putting up with this. They started trying them. So starting in 1848, they left. Where'd they come? Yankee Land, America. First thing they did, just like all socialists do, they took over the schools and the churches. The churches were transcendentalist or Unitarian. When Reconstruction came along, they came south and took over our schools, and they're still teaching that same thing. How many people know that the first 3 states that Abraham Lincoln invaded hadn't seceded?
He took 31,000 political prisoners, Lincoln did.
Yes.
He arrested the mayor of Baltimore. He arrested the police.
He arrested most of the legislature of the state of Maryland. He also went into Kentucky and also into Missouri. Now, folks, I do a Substack on the atrocities of the war in Missouri. What those, I'm going to say it, pardon me, what those Yankee bastards did to the people of Missouri is a sin. But no one was ever prosecuted. No one. But those people came from Europe and they took over the party. They started the Republican Party in Ripon, Wisconsin. And so then they manipulate and get the 1860 Republican Convention moved from New York to Illinois. I wonder why. And then one of these Marxists is credited with bringing between 300,000 to 400,000 votes to Abraham Lincoln from foreigners. Think we're going to see that again? Suddenly, 300,000 to 400,000 people vote. Have you ever looked at Lincoln's generals and seen how many of them were Marxists? There was one named Blinker. He's the one that helped him get all the votes. Here's another thing that people don't stop and think about. Abraham Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot in 10 southern states in 1860. Not even on the ballot. Abraham Lincoln won the presidency. He won the presidency with less than 40% of the vote. If you would have taken away the hundreds of thousands of votes of illegal immigrants, I don't know if they were illegal back then, I don't know if we had a law about it, but if you take away the votes of these immigrants, he would have had 20 to 22% of the vote. And why should a people that won't even put a man on their ballot, why should they have to be subservient to him? Isn't there something, of course it first appeared in Patrick Henry's Constitution, but then Thomas Jefferson says a legitimate government operates only with the consent of the governed. Everybody raise your hand that's consented to this mess we got in Washington today. Well, I'm going to tell you something's going to bother you. Every time you vote, you consent. You consent to the outcome. I haven't voted since 1988. And I got so angry with the Republican Party at the National Convention in New Orleans. It's just hard to imagine, but I was Vice President of the American Foundation for the Accountability of Prisoners of War and Missing in Action. And we had a bill before Congress, and we wanted the Republicans to support it because we knew the Democrats never would. We had a bill before Congress that no one could ever declare a man missing in action or as a POW, leave them behind. Never again. We left over 2,000 behind at the end of World War I in the hands of the Russians, and then lied and said, no, we didn't. We left over 20,000 behind at the end of World War II in the hands of Joseph Stalin. Eisenhower lied and covered it up. Said, no, that didn't happen. 8,000 from Korea. And then about 12 to 1,800 from Vietnam. My brother-in-law was one of them. And this government lied to his family, lied to my mother-in-law, lied to my father-in-law, lied to my wife for 20-some years. And by sheer accident, good Lord had his hand in it, I'm sure, I ran into a man who was a Navy rescue diver during the Vietnam War, and he was on the Army and Air Force, I think, called them Jolly Green Giants, remember? Well, the Navy called it the Big Mother. And he was a diver. And he found out, someone gave him some of my works that he was reading, and he contacted me. And he said, you said in one of them that your brother-in-law was a POW or MIA. And he said, you didn't list his name. And so I sent it to him. And I got a phone call in about 15 seconds. He said, I wrote a book called The Big Mother, and it's dedicated to your brother-in-law. He said, we tried to get to them in the South China Sea after they were hit. He said, unfortunately, when we got to the bodies, they were both dead. He said, because their canopy didn't eject and they were pitched into the canopy and it broke their necks. He said, but we fought hard to try to recover their bodies, but we came under so much enemy fire, we were unable to do it. He said, one of our men ended up being permanently disabled because he lost so much oxygen trying to get them. He said they were tangled up in their bodies were tangled up in their chutes. He said he was trying to cut them loose from the chutes. His air gave out, and he said he had irreparable brain damage. But I found out where he was. I was giving a program there a couple of weeks later. I took my wife. And they sat at the back of the room. And he talked to her about her brother. Did you know that 3 weeks before I found out about this guy, the federal government sent my wife a DNA request because they thought they might have some bones that might be her brother? And they knew from 20-some years before that they didn't? Because I've got a copy. The gentleman that wrote the book gave me a copy of the file that they sent to the federal government stating these two men we tried, and then gave the tail number for their aircraft. What kind of government lies to people like that? And I'm going to tell you another thing. I don't want to get too far. Hopefully we get Ron ready to go, Mr. Kukul. But something I'll never forget. I joined the Army in high school, right before I graduated, on the delayed enlistment program. I didn't tell my grandpa. I went home and told him, after I graduated, I said, well, 2 weeks I got a report for basic training, Fort Benning, Georgia. You know what my grandpa said to me? Well, boy, I didn't know you were going to join the Yankee Army. And then it came back to me sitting and talking with him, 1969. Remember the My Lai massacre? We were talking about that, and my boy said, yep, that's the Yankee Army for you. They go into countries where they have no business and they kill people they don't know, just like they did us in the South. Now, folks, are you aware that every war that this country's been involved in my lifetime was started on a lie? Every one of them? FDR knew that the Japanese were coming to bomb Pearl Harbor. He knew it. A Navy veteran, trying to think of his name now, it's called Day of Deceit, Robert, anyway, it'll come to me. He did 7 years of research and 21,000 interviews. And he wrote his book, Day of Deceit, proving the bibliography is unreal. He proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that the whole thing was made up by a communist in FDR's administration. Because this communist was very close friends with Stalin. And Stalin had told him, his name is Harry White. That's not his real name. He was Jewish, imagine that. But they said to him, look, Stalin had said, I got a copy of the communiques, came out of the Library of Congress. Stalin had said to him, we can't fight a war on two fronts. I can't fight Hitler on one front and the Japanese on the other front. Because the Japanese were coming across Manchuria. They hated communism. And they were coming after Stalin. And he said, I can't fight them on both fronts. You've got to do something to help me. So Harry White writes a memorandum called Operation Snow. And that was how they would shut the Japanese, shut their access to every bit of petroleum anywhere, force them to go to war. And they knew they were coming. They had broken the Japanese code at least 2 weeks before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Why do you think he moved the aircraft carriers out and left the battleships? Because at that time, the Navy themselves had said the battleships are obsolete. So they left them behind. You know, I myself, and I'm just speaking for me, I don't tell anybody else what to do, but I want nothing to do with this government. Nothing. But when we went to New Orleans in '88 and we pitched this bill to prevent American soldiers from being just cast away and lied about, the Republican Party threw us under the bus. And from that point forward, I said, I will never vote again. Never. And my grandpa used to tell me when I was younger, and I would say, well, I got to vote, the election's coming up. He said, and you think it matters? You really believe that? He said, maybe I shouldn't let you go to school after all. But that is where we are, folks, and we've got 10 minutes till my time is up, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about my involvement with the USS Liberty. But before that, I've got to tell you, secession, you can't ask your state to secede if you haven't done it yourself. If you haven't said, I will not participate in this government, I will not contribute to it, I will not participate. Now, they've got us hung up on taxes. It's really hard to not do that. But they've got you, and that was the first power to Congress. Unlimited taxation from unlimited sources for unlimited reasons. Do they have to ask you before they send money to the Ukraine? Sure, money. You get to say where they send it? But 1967, I had been with NSA for a short time. And I was at an FLR-9 facility. And I asked Dana earlier if she had ever heard of that. Anybody in here ever heard of an FLR-9 facility? In the military, they were called elephant cages because they were huge. They were 30 feet tall, 100 feet in diameter, a big circle. So you can see why they got called elephant cages. There were 11 of them in the world. And they could listen to anything or collect Morse code or electronic signals anywhere. You could not evade that. And today, if you don't know it, every time you hit that phone with a text or anything else, it goes into the NSA collection facility in Utah. Now, it may not be monitored at that time, but they have it. They can go back and look. Well, I was at an FLR-9 facility in a place called Karamsel, Turkey. I had been traveling between the FLR-9 facilities. And that day was the day that the USS Liberty was attacked. And I sat and listened to it. The whole time just becoming so angry. We had translators, we had Russian translators, we had Middle Eastern language translators, we had Hebrew translators, we had everything. The federal government knew that moment that Israel did that intentionally. Israel did that intentionally because LBJ planned it so he could get reelected in '68. And what they wanted to do was to sink the USS Liberty. And why did they pick on the USS Liberty? Well, out there is this ship and it only has 2 machine guns. That's all they got. A 50 caliber aft and a 50 caliber stern. So if you're going to attack one, let's do that. They were going to sink the Liberty, kill everyone on it, because the last thing, Ron probably won't talk about it, he's been having flashbacks. But the last thing he remembers was even when they tried to put people in lifeboats, they came in and were shooting the lifeboats and trying to kill them all. And I'll never forget one of the first times we actually sat and talked. I said, Ron, God wasn't going to let the Liberty sink. Because he'll probably tell you they towed them back to Sicily, I think it was. And he said when they got there, everyone who looked at the ship said, no way in hell that stays afloat. No way. Hit with torpedoes, big gaping holes. And when Ron was trying to tend, he don't talk about himself a lot, so I'll do it for him. He was on the deck trying to help the people who had been wounded, trying to do everything he could, and they were being strafed while they were trying to tend their own wounded. And I don't know if Ron will have a chance to say this or not, but he's told me, also Phil Turney has told me, that when they got to, I'm trying to think, Sicily may not be the right place, but when they got to the port where they were going to get all of the men off, Admiral Kidd comes walking into the survivors. He stands at the end of the table, reaches up, takes his collar brass off, sets it down on the table. And he says, now I'm going to tell you men something. I'm going to tell you right here. You ever repeat anything that happened, you'll either be court-martialed or you might not even survive. Put his collar back on and left. The next day at our FLR 9 facility in Karamsel, Turkey, one of the supervisors for the national security came in and said, men, you didn't hear anything yesterday. And if you claim you did, you're going to prison. So can you understand now why I don't trust this government? Because it's just like I asked Mr. Darby. I said, Mr. Darby, if you went out on my behalf and you said, I'll do whatever it takes up to the point of giving my life, how in the world could I sell him down the river? How could you do that? It's impossible for me to understand. I've got to tell you, I can't. Just a few minutes left. Guys, about secession, again, you have to secede individually. You have to say, I'm not going to be a part of this mess anymore. Because again, I'm not going to try to tell you what your conscience tells you to do. That's up to you and the Lord. But how can you vote for something? Because even if your person doesn't win, as my good buddy, God rest his soul, Butler Schaefer, an attorney in Los Angeles, California, taught law school for years, he said two things. What if they gave an election and nobody came? How are they going to explain that? And then he said something else. No matter who you vote for, the government gets elected. It doesn't matter, you put any face you want to on there. They're going to do what they've been told to do, or they know that they might get a free ride in Dallas, Texas. But secede as an individual. Now, two things, about our Culture Center, Southern Culture Center Sunday. Folks, it's on republicbroadcasting.org, republicbroadcastingnetwork.org. They've got several buttons there you can hit. And Cliff, can I borrow you a second? Yes, sir. Glad you showed up, buddy. Began to worry about you. I was about to send out the dogs. Always good to see you, brother.
Good to see you.
Okay. Now, Cliff has been reading my Substack. And so rather than me tell you that I think it's really good, because I do, but the thing of it is, I have 2 climate-controlled storage units with documents I've collected over the past 45 years. At some point in time, I hope to get, good Lord gives me the time, I want to get every one of them on this Substack. I want people able to see them. You want to tell them what you see, sir?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recently, I subscribed to Michael Gaddy's Substack, as he had said, and the thing is I'm more than intrigued. And as much as I've learned since late 2019 about, it all started with me learning the truth about the war, and I didn't even know about Michael Gaddy until here recently. Well, the more I learn, the more I'm shocked about the things I don't know. And you can tell even Mike and them last year or so or whatever, and even Larry Darby and texting him, the more I learn about the elite Jews, the scarier they look. Oh, God. But then recently, Michael Gaddy has added another dimension of intrigue, and his Substack is absolutely worth it. Today, for instance, I went back because I'm behind on even where I started on the Substack, and I believe it's Substack Whistling Dixie 16. He starts talking about how these documents I never heard of, a letter from Lighthorse Henry Lee to, I can't think of who it was, but anyway, talking about this secret meeting in the Senate where the 10th Amendment don't even say what we thought it meant. Although we honestly were fighting for state rights and we should have them, it was secretly taken away in that meeting. And Lighthorse Harry Lee knew it, just that most of Southerners didn't.
Richard Henry Lee.
Richard Henry Lee, my bad. Richard Henry Lee. And then the Substack goes into this, he's tying how George Wallace and what he stood for. Of course, at that point, me being an Alabamian, I'm really proud. And it was so good and so worth it. I encourage everybody, just $10 a month for Mr. Gaddy's Substack. It is absolutely worth it. And it's interesting to see how all this he teaches permeates everything we look at in the news and what we had seen. And then he even threw in a little bit of tough stuff about the man who tried to assassinate George Wallace that I didn't know. Sounds more than fishy.
You mean he was financed by the Secret Service?
Yeah, that's
pardon me.
the details he gave just it's obviously something that never got investigated correctly or never wanted to be investigated, but it's more than worth it. And the things he says make sense. It doesn't sound like some pie in the sky made up stuff. He has things to back up what he's saying. What he's saying is logical. Most of all, you can see the results of it. So I encourage everybody to get this Substack because I'm very excited about it.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate that. Folks, I just got a text from Ron Kukl. He says he can't make it. He's going to have to. Folks, I have been talking with him all week long. Ron needs your prayers. Ron has been having flashbacks, and one day I talked with him through some of his flashbacks, trying to help him. And it's really bothering him. Also, the other, he's the chaplain for the survivors. We will get him. We'll get him on one, maybe even our show on Sunday. We'll get him on a program there. I hate that you folks don't get to hear Ron. Ron's worth the world in so many ways because he's been the chaplain for all these men. You got any idea how many funerals he's preached for these survivors over the years? He had 3 in 1 week. And as he said to me recently, we're dropping like flies, Mike. And I said, Ron, your memory will never die. As long as I have anything to say, anything that I can do about it. So, folks, since Ron's not going to be with us, and I really feel bad about that, but yes, ma'am. Would you please come do it?
And that would kind of help everyone understand why
Yes.
he's struggling.
Yes. Yeah, please do. Come on.
I guess it's been a couple of weeks ago, you had reached out to try to get people to pray for him. But he's 85 years old, and he's been through a lot. And as you said, he suffered with PTSD all of his life.
Yes.
Since 1967. But he had posted this, and it tells you what he's struggling with, but it also shows you what his character is. I can never count the miracles that kept the Liberty from going to the bottom. They're countless. It was unfortunate that I was in the area where the torpedo exploded prematurely and blowing a hole in the starboard side of the ship. Had it not hit an I-beam on entry, I wouldn't be here talking. The Liberty was also unique in its construction, which placed the boiler plan aft instead of its usual place amidship. Miracle number 1. The ability of our man, Terry Halbardier, I think is what his name is, Halbardier, who patched in an attempt to get out a distress signal under fire, was miracle number 2. Myself being made maybe 60 foot or so from the explosion and still staying alive, I ended up flat on the steel deck after my prayers only seconds just before the torpedo entered and blew up. By the way, I did not put myself there, someone else did. That was miracle number 3. Standing with my shipmates topside after escaping from the watery grave down below, slapping each other on the back and shaking hands, etc., while according to Phil Turney, they were still firing 50 caliber machine guns at us, and yet no one got hurt. We were so glad to get out of the hole down below. We were evidently oblivious to the hail of machine gun fire all around us, miracle number 4. As supervisor of the body recovery down below, no one could stand the smell, yet I stayed down there through all of it, and I smelled nothing, miracle number 5. As far as I know, the professionals who observed the ship after the attack all said they could not believe we sailed this battered ship all the way 1,000 miles, and it still would not go down. I wish I could go on, but maybe there is enough for all to see that the power of God is unparalleled in any event. This is only a few I know about, and there's so many others, so many. I still say no man could ever put an end to this, as Israel still remains disobedient to this day. No man or woman will ever stop the judgment that has been placed on this nation. If enough praying people got out there and do so, we may have a chance, but still, that is the only way. I have seen God's handiwork, and I will leave you all with that.
Folks, pardon me, I've talked with Ron this week. It chokes me up a little bit when I start thinking about what he's going through. And he shouldn't have to have ever gone through that. That is just absolutely beyond unspeakable. But anyway, I tell you what, why don't we plan third Sunday in October to have Ron and Phil Turney on with the SCC Sunday show. So we'll do everything we can to see if that happens. You know, I feel bad that Ron couldn't make it tonight, but my sympathy and my prayers are with Ron. And I hope you folks will. I know I contacted everybody I know. Pastor John Weaver, put him in his prayer group. My other good pastor friend in Nebraska, Ted Weiland, he put him in his prayer group, in his prayer circle. My fellow friend who was our pastor in Colorado, we called him the cowboy preacher because he wore a big cowboy hat and had a handlebar mustache. Just one super gentleman. He's in his 80s now too. But he put him in all of their prayer groups there as well. But we all know Lord's will be done. And so the one thing I would like to do, maybe take just a couple of minutes, Mike, if I could. Does anyone have any questions or comments, please? Yes, sir.
You know a good book on Patrick Henry?
I'm sorry, sir?
Patrick Henry, is there a book out on his biography that's worth reading?
One of the best books written on Patrick Henry was written by his grandson, but it was published a lot of years ago. It's hard to find. If you would like, I'll get it to Mike and Ed and where it might be purchased. But one that is good, that is available, it's called The Voice of Thunder. And I've got to tell you very quickly how he got that voice of thunder. 24th day of June, 1788, Virginia Ratification Convention. Patrick Henry is seeing that it's coming down to a final vote. So he starts really putting out the genuine Patrick Henry. Emotions, just like he did at St. John's Church when he said, "I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." That's the kind of man he was. And so Patrick Henry, that on the 24th, he said, he was in the middle of this with all of the passion in the world. It's late June, thunderstorm comes up, crack, lightning hits a tree outside the building. The people inside get a little shook. Patrick Henry doesn't stop. He keeps going. He's pushing it. Bam! Another lightning bolt hits a tree right outside the building. Everybody in the building jumps up and runs away. The next day, Patrick Henry was accused of calling down the dark spirits. Seriously. But the one was written by Henry Wirt. Mike, can I send you a newsletter so maybe you can send it out to the folks with a lot of the books and other stuff that's on there? Yes, sir.
You were talking about how getting into war. It's interesting, in 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, Russia invaded Poland at the same time.
Russia actually invaded Poland first.
And Britain and France declared war on Germany, but not on Russia.
I wonder how that happened.
If the point is that they're going to declare war for invading Poland, why don't they declare war on Russia?
Because Russia was an ally. Now here, Mike, I hate to take up too much time. 1933, 1932, Joseph Stalin kills over 9 million Ukrainians, starves them to death. It's called the Holodomor. He starves them to death. And the Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of that part of the world. He starved the people to death. Then he had people executed. You ever heard of a Molotov cocktail? Came from General Molotov. He was one of the ones that was killing all the people. He and a guy by the name of Nikita Khrushchev. Maybe you've heard of him. But anyway, they were involved in killing these people, and the United States government covered it up. Walter Duranty with the New York Times, who had won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting, and this just shows you how dumb Americans can be. He put in the newspaper, he said, "No, they're not starving the people to death, they're dying of malnutrition." But anyway, it worked. And then in 1933, after all of this happens, the United States had said we will never recognize Russia again after World War I. 1933, what does FDR do? Recognizes the Soviet Union. And he calls Stalin Uncle Joe. There were 234 communist agents in the FDR administration, all the way into the Department of Agriculture. Yes, sir.
The first concentration camps were in Missouri.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And Grant kicked all the Jews out of St. Louis.
Well, how many of you have heard of the, I was trying to think, all of the Germans that we killed that Eisenhower covered up? Rhine Meadows. How many of you ever heard of Rhine Meadows? We starved about 1 million Germans to death after the war.
Y'all, Ron's going to be kind enough to take some questions. He'll be back at the center table back there. And we'll stay here as long as Brother Gaddy's up to it.
Be careful what you say.
So,
If we're talking about the Confederacy, I may be here for the weekend.
I'm going to tell you, if this hadn't been an eye-opener, I don't know what is. And And you're talking about something that's succeeding on a personal basis has got to be the first step. But the stories he shared about Vietnam, not to mention that was firsthand personal information, but business has been destroyed, the moral fiber of this country that's being destroyed, it's affected us all on a personal level. And it's way past time that we succeeded on an individual basis. And I pray for today, as Brother Jimmy Brown has said so many times at the end of his prayer, I pray for a peaceful face among the nations of this earth, for the South and for Dixie. But let's give Ron a big hand. God bless you.
If I may, let me tell you folks, before I shut up, my wife says you'll never shut up, but before, and she's a math professor, so she tells me my head's full of useless knowledge. But let me tell you how you can get my Substack, please. It's Michael Gaddy, all lowercase, at Substack, capital SUBSTACK.com. Now you can come on as a free subscriber and see if you like it. And then if you want to get the really good stuff, you can become a paid subscriber and I rip you off for $10 a month. And I think it's worth it. But anyway, folks, I tell you what, I've told people this before. I told them on the show Sunday night when we were on there. I walk into this place, it's like coming back home. Thank you.
Thank you for that membership. He loves his family. He's part of our extended family, and he turned his membership in tonight, so we really appreciate that. Ron, Michael, y'all, that's all we have. I'll tell you one more thing about Jimmy Brown. That's his services at Hackneyville Baptist Church. If you're not for real familiar with Hackneyville, I know you go right on through Goodwater up Highway 9. If you're coming from this way, turn right on 63. It'll carry you right to it. Coming through from Coosa County that way, you still got to go that way. You got to cross 9 up there somewhere, I guess come out 280.
What day is it?
Saturday.
This Saturday?
It says Saturday at 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock Saturday. And you know what Jimmy has meant? And I think it'll mean something to his family, you know, for the center to have a good contingency there. I know, Floyd, you're looking into getting some flowers from the center delivered there to Hackneyville Baptist. And we'll go up and, well, I say goodbye to Brother Jimmy. We won't never, it's just, he's one of a kind. And y'all know what he's meant to this group and to us as a people. And thank everybody. Brother Gaddy's there. Larry, great sponsor, Mary Lou, others has helped make this possible through special donations. We all donate our time and money. We're going to have that. We're not going to raffle our book tonight. We're going to wait till we get our interview with Brother Kukul. And we're going to have, it's an autographed book. So that'll make a great great book for somebody's library. So thank y'all very much. Thank everybody that worked so hard on the supper, that brought the desserts. And God bless you all. Safe travel.